Great, I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. I'm super excited. I'm at the keyboard. Can you see it fine?
Yeah, I see perfectly fine. I
Um,
have two options for you. I can have this view, which is convenient for me, because if I want to demonstrate something, I can do like
yeah.
this. Alternatively, I can put it on the table next to me, but then it's a little awkward because I have to turn around.
Um,
But I can do that. I can show you how that would look.
would it be too hard to alternate sometimes?
Back and forth. I guess not,
Probably so.
because this is the other point of view that I could offer you. This could be useful if we end up talking about posture, because then you can see my full body.
Oh, we're definitely going to talk about posture. That so that might be better actually.
Yeah, it's just that
Yeah.
I'm a little short-sighted, so I'm gonna have to bring the computer closer if I want to read your
Okay. And
comments.
what I'm going to do, my computer is directly behind my phone, so I'm actually going to turn it towards me so I can kind of read the comments in the chat as we're talking.
All right, one moment. I just need to plug
Perfect.
in my charger.
You're good. And can you hear this by chance? Chat, can you hear that clearly? Is it like breaking up at all, or what's up? Okay, cool. Cool. It seems chat can hear me fine, so that's good. I'm wondering about volume. Chat, should the volume of how's my voice compared to the keyboard, and should the keyboard be any louder or softer? Because it's a Yamaha, so I can just turn it up and down.
That sounds just fine to me.
Okay. I see Ludwig is typing right now, so I'm waiting for her response. Okay, good, awesome. Um, I'm gonna state this, I guess, for recording purposes. Actually, should I back up the camera a bit more? You think probably maybe to we're getting there. How about something like this? Is that better? You think
Yeah,
for a
as
whole
long
lot?
as you're mindful of where the camera is pointing and that you stay in the point of view of the camera.
Yeah. I think that should be fine. I guess I'll state this for recording purposes, and we can kind of trim it to kind of start here and trim out the rest when we upload it to YouTube. Um, but this is a roundtable, open table discussion, lecture, demonstration thing. I don't really
Conversation.
know. A conversation with demonstration. How about that? And this started as a result of Bjorn and I having some private DMs about just technique and methods and kind of defining terms, some semantics of technique, I guess we can call it, of agreeing on
Yep.
terms before we actually start to discuss technique itself, and defining movement and some anatomy and various things. And so we had the idea to just share what was going to be our one-on-one conversation with the world and with especially the Discord here in the academy and all that. And I think it's going to be a great thing. And this is going to be, we have no script for this. We have no overarching plan for this. We're just going to talk about technique and our various methods. He grew up on the, or not grew up. He's worked on the Tamani method. I have grown up since I was much younger on the Lister Sync method, which I had my teaching manual that I got when I finished it. So that was, I forgot I even had that. I never use it anymore. And I brought that out because it's going to be really helpful. And I also brought the two books that I grew up on, which are the Cherney 21st Studies for the Left Hand, which are pretty gnarly, especially if you're younger and have small hands. And then the Hand and Virtuoso Pianist, which people oftentimes either love or hate, and there's no in between on that. people love it or they hate it, and there's no in between. I've never seen someone who is in like had no preference on it. So, anyways, we're just gonna talk about technique, demonstrate some things, talk about Chopin etudes. I'll probably talk about Schubert some because that's what I'm studying mostly right now, and we're just gonna turn it loose. Sound good?
That sounds excellent. Let's just confirm before we dive into it, Maestro, if you could, if you haven't already, just start the recording.
Yeah. Let me get my keyboard over here so I can respond and stuff.
You have started. Excellent. Yeah, so like Matthew said, we were just talking about technique in DMs, and I realized quickly that since we come from two different backgrounds, it could be useful to just have a deep dive session and really clarify terms and terminology and how is technique defined and taught in the Lister-Sync method versus the Timani method, and try to find some common ground and maybe learn something from one another.
Absolutely. So where do you want to start? That's what I'm curious about.
The personal journey, and I can start with mine, and then I'll ask you to share yours, because I think that's a
Sure.
good starting point. So
Please go ahead.
I studied piano at the conservatory in Tromsø in Norway, and in my third year, when I was preparing for my final exam, I suffered an injury, a straining injury in my right forearm that was so severe that I had to stop playing the piano. I had to stop practicing. And I was shocked because no one at the university was able to help me. My teacher didn't know what to do, the other faculty didn't know what to do with me. Fortunately, I found a specialist named Tina Margareta Nilsen who created a method for injury preventative technique called Timani. So I flew from Tromsø to Oslo to take lessons with her and to study with her. And for those of you who don't know, that's a 2-hour flight each way. So I studied Timani with Tina for 3 years, and then I spent a few more years trying out, experimenting different techniques, different healing approaches to recover from my injury. And it seems now that I have successfully recovered from my injury. I'm practicing every day now and building a completely new technique from scratch using what I learned from Tina from the Timani method. So that's my journey through piano technique and the way I got into Timani in the first place. How about you, Matthew? How did you end up with or how did you find the Lister-Sync method?
Well, and that's pretty cool. I never knew you actually flew, so that's interesting. I definitely haven't flown to get my technique lessons, but that's dedication, so I can admire that a lot. Well, it kind of went along with my conservatory track into high school. I was training to be a concert pianist since I was young, and I came to her at just the right time because when I was 14 is when I came to her, and I had this pretty gnarly idea that because my teacher, a lot of piano teachers don't even discuss technique. It's just kind of you sit at the keyboard, you put your hands up, your belly button. What I was told is your belly button lines up with middle C, and you just play. That's what I was like. Okay, cool. And so I had this pretty gnarly idea that everything would look flat because when my piano teacher played, she looked like Horowitz on steroids. It was just like her hands were here, and that was it. I mean, like you could like put a paper on them, like it's just flat. And so I thought, okay, everything comes up from here and down, which is a pretty fast track to get injured.
Yep.
And I remember the limit I reached when I tried playing the Duruflé Opus 7 like this. I mean, this was when I was like really before I met Barbara. And I tried playing what was a oh, I can't even do it on here. Wow, Yamahas. But that organ piece, and it was just like, and I tried doing it. I mean, it was just horrendous. I couldn't even get the first page done, and so that made me question a lot of things about. Okay, that was the first time I thought, especially as a young kid. Okay, how do the greats actually be great? how are they able to physically just do all this stuff? And that's when I got the offer to come to the conservatory that I went to at 14 or 15 or whatever, at 14, yeah. And I stayed there through high school and college. And um, that's where Barbara taught, was there. And Barbara taught at both Salem College and the conservatory that I went to. Ironically, you have the street in Winston-Salem, and on one side of the street, the entire side of it is owned by the UNC School of the Arts, and on the next side of the street is Salem College. So, and for Barbara to teach, she would just walk across the street, and then she was at the other college. So it's pretty convenient, two colleges across the street from each other, literally, 20-foot road. So, and that's what, and I deep dive with her, and she started me over from ground one, didn't let me play any repertoire for 3 months at all, just had me doing basic strokes and posture exercises and stuff, and we built up from there. So yeah, that's my story.
So you studied with Barbara from you were around 15 onwards, is that correct?
Yeah, around 14, 15 onwards. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so that was how many years ago, approximately?
8.
8 years ago. Right.
8 years
So you've
ago.
been doing
Yeah.
that for 8 years. I studied with Tina, let me think. I started 2016. So that's 6 years ago.
Okay. Good.
Cool.
Um,
I have a question.
please.
And this is now we're gonna start to dive into it a little bit.
Yeah.
How much emphasis is there on studying anatomy in the Lister-Sink method?
So a lot. One of Barbara's degrees was from Columbia University in South Carolina, and it was in biomechanics. So the entire foundation of this uh, whole body technique, as she calls it, is biomechanics. It's how the body is supposed to naturally work. And she has an affinity for watching tennis players and golf players, especially, using their whole bodies to achieve this refined coordination, which allows them to do their craft so well. And so, to answer your question, yes, it's the entire core of it.
All right.
How about for yours?
One of the first things Tina ordered me to do as a student was to acquire one of these blocks. This is Themis Anatomy, Muscular Skeletal Anatomy.
Okay.
It's pretty thick. It's all in Latin, and it covers most of the stuff that we as pianists need to understand. The anatomy, if you've ever opened one of these books, you will recognize it. Okay, it's got pictures, it's got explanations, all the terminology in Latin. And she was like, yeah, get to it, start studying. Memorizing the bones and the joints and the muscles. So in Timani, similar to Barbara, Tina is also educated in anatomy, in biomechanics. She also took some other educations. She's a yoga teacher. She also studied Feldenkrais. She was into Alexander technique for a bit, and it seemed to me that she kind of picked what she thought was the most useful out of all these previously established methods, combine it with her anatomy knowledge and her education, and then just lots of observation, lots of teaching, lots of experimentation until she finally sort of consolidated her experience into a method.
Got it. And do you know if by chance she was injured and that made her find this, or she decided to find it on her own without getting injured?
She's not injured to my knowledge.
Okay.
I forgot what made her start it in the first place. I think it was when she went to Berlin, and yeah, I think it was Berlin or Bern. She studied with a professor named Heide Goertz, German professor Heide Goertz, and she had something she called the Goertz method, which was it had some study of anatomy, it had some emphasis on movement, and that kind of got her into that line of thinking. And then she kind of expanded on the Goertz method. So the Gertz method eventually became just one of many methods from which Tina drew inspiration.
Got it. Got it. Okay. I know that Barbara originally had no intention of this whatsoever. She was playing Beethoven's Fifth Concerto with the Concertgebouw Orchestra when she was a young teenager, and the Fifth Concerto ended up causing her to get so injured that she couldn't play. Like she couldn't sit down at the keyboard and do this because her whole arm up to her shoulder would just it would just catch on fire and scream immediately.
Sounds
And
very
so
familiar.
yeah, she couldn't even open her hands, and it's tragic. And so she spent a long time, as you said, as you exactly said, she was so shocked that every university she went to, nobody could help her. Nobody knew how to help her. And she went to this pianist, and you have to forgive me, it's a long Russian name which I'm not good at pronouncing, but I'll type it in the chat when I'm done here. And she studied with this person, and this person ended up this lady ended up helping her to free herself. And this lady had come from the vein of Rachmaninoff and the Russian school, the old Russian school of playing. And so she helped Barbara work her way out of her injury. And one thing that she said to Barbara, the final test was for Barbara to play the Chopin Butterfly Etude, and she had Barbara play it, and then she asked Barbara what she felt, and Barbara said, "Well, nothing." And then her teacher said, "Well, you got it then. If you feel nothing, then you've got it." And so that struck Barbara, and so Barbara, in her late 20s, came back to be the professor of piano at Eastman. And so Barbara was one of the professors at Eastman for I think around 20 years. And she taught this method, but she never actually put it into a book. She never condensed it. She never patented it or copyrighted it. And so when she retired from Eastman, she kind of realized that, okay, this is something that I've been teaching for the past 20 years. I've kind of refined it, in my mind, and now I'm actually going to put it down, apply it, and then go somewhere that has a non-existent program so I can build my own from scratch and make it a thing, make it a place where pianists in America from all over can come just to study this method. And so she went to Salem College because they didn't have a piano program really at all. She built one there, and she built it, because a lot of times if you're at Juilliard or whatever, or Eastman, you kind of have to teach their way. You're following in a big tradition. Whereas here, they had no music program. So she built her own. And so people come here from all over now to get rid of their injuries. And she's, as far as I know, she's had a 100% success rate.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It seems to be the case that if you want to do something radically different than the established method in these big institutions, it
Yeah.
seems much easier to just go your own way and create your own institution than to try to transform the existing traditions.
I mean, hence Josh and I's dream with the Duruflé Academy, just to look short. And secondly, even looking to my master's degree that I'm getting, now, who would have ever thought that this small little college in Greensboro would have had a great pianoforte program? But this guy has his degrees from Cornell and Curtis, and he hated the way that the institutions were imposing their ways upon students, and he didn't agree with it. So he went there 30 years ago and started a forte piano program, and now he has a larger collection of instruments there than Cornell does. So you're absolutely right. It's the way to go. It's the way to go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of similar with Tina because she has been teaching in Timani in the institutions in Norway for some years, but she's only she comes there once a year and she does a lecture and it does a masterclass, which is great, but it's not
Mm,
enough. It's not enough.
yeah.
So we students have been asking, we need to learn more of this, and they were like, okay, maybe she can come twice a year, okay, but this is just not enough. So people have been flying and visiting Tina to study. So she eventually started her own institution in Oslo,
Oh,
and she
really?
has trained over 100 musicians in the method now. We
Wow.
now certified teachers of this method.
That's awesome.
So that's really cool. And I think by now, Timani is the biggest injury preventative method in Norway. It's being taught in most of the institutions. And you, in Oslo, in the academy in Oslo, you can also study it as a, what do you call it? It's
And
not a
elective?
mandatory, it's not a mandatory subject, but it's an optional subject in your third and fourth year of the
Yeah,
bachelor degree.
yeah,
You can take study it with her.
that's awesome. That's really great that even at the college level and a public university, you can study it. That says something to the quality of the technique, I think.
It says something about the quality, here's an interesting point. It's not the teachers or the faculty that brought these methods to the institutions. It has always been the students
Yeah,
who who are knocking on the barricades of these old institution maintainers saying we need this.
yeah,
Yeah, we don't care how you do it, just make room for this in our curriculum. We need this if we want to do it. And I perfectly agree with that. When I was a student, I was on the student board in the university council.
hmm
I was a student representative, rather, in the university council. And one of the things that I managed to do when we were revising the study program was that I managed to convince them to have more of this injury preventative education as
hmm
part of the degree. And that's
That's
been the
great.
case in every institution that I know of. It's the students who bring this in, not the other faculty.
Yeah, and um, from what I've seen, I would agree with that too. I think most change nowadays is done by students. Yeah.
Why do you
Well,
think that is?
uh, because the youngest generation of people in any given time is always the one that's tired of the old traditions. Just as a default answer, um,
Yeah,
in any given time. I mean, even 1,000 years ago, it was that way. The young people are always fed up with the old people, and it's almost always 50-50. Some things they're fed up about, they're wrong about, and some things they're fed up about, they're perfectly right about. There's
right.
brilliance in tradition, and there's also always things that you can do better.
It reminds me, I had a teacher in high school. He was slightly elderly gentleman in his 50s, I think. And he said something slightly profound. He said, it is the privilege and the duty of the younger generation to revolt against the older generation.
Yeah, yeah,
So that seems to be what is happening right now. I'm very happy to see this change coming because honestly, I think that what we have been doing, when I say we, I mean the whole classical industry. I
hmm
think what we have been doing up until now is not sustainable. I don't think it is sustainable to increase the demands and the expectations on the students and trying to produce virtuoso musicians at a younger and younger age without some awareness, at least, of how this apparatus works, how the body works. Because the risk of injury just increases the more you increase the pressure. And let's say the more ignorance we have, the less knowledge we have, the more likely it is to happen.
yeah. And I also have thought a lot about that. And one of the interesting things that I've realized is that, and another thing, this is a particularly I think the second point, and this is more original. The first point is kind of an obvious one, and that is that the younger that you start to try to develop a quote unquote. Well, first of all, how do you define virtuoso? But moving past that, um, going with the popular definition of it is creating a pianist who can play all the list etudes fast. The younger you start these pianists, and the younger that you as a parent can find them to their practice rooms for 8-10 hours a day, and you're just making them do their stuff and depriving them of food and whatnot, as I hear a lot of cases, or as I hear in a lot of cases, the less mature of a musician they're going to be, because in order to be a musician, you must live life. I know Schubert for a fact. He wrote it in his diaries when he was dying. He went on walks every day. He would compose from around 8 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, and after 2 p.m. he stopped composing. and he would go and have beers with his friends, hang out, play folk music. He played in bands. He played violin with them. He would accompany them on the little raggedy old keyboards out in the street. He would play out in nature. He played sports games. Beethoven went on 3-hour walks every morning. I mean, these people, these great composers, they had lives. They went outside, and music was not the only thing that they did. And this whole tradition of you must choose one thing, and stick to it, and you must practice the piano 8 hours in a little tiny box. I mean, how uninspiring. And so there's no wonder that a lot of musicians nowadays, you can pick one up. You can pick a lot of times you can pick up one Juilliard student and replace them with another one, and you can't tell the difference. It's because
But they play so similarly.
exactly. There's this factory this factory mass production mindset has even creeped into the music world to the point where there's so many pianists who are just they're just factory productions of their teachers. They just sound the same. Um and so what that ends up doing, and this is my second observation, is that instead of being more profound and more living more life as a pianist like maybe Andras Schiff or some of the old greats have done, and Chopin himself have done, and living more life and being more mature that way, because they don't have the option to be more mature, that only leaves to they say, how can I stand out, how can I make a name of myself, and the only place they can go is be more exotic. So that is my theory as to why the pianists nowadays have become more exotic, like Yuzha Wang, for example, or someone like that, where if you strip them of if you take them away and you blindfold everyone in the audience and they can't watch them, what you're listening to is not a remarkable performance. But it's what people see and remember all the this and the banging, and then she stands up and does the huge bow and flings her hair everywhere, and it's that personality that people see and buy tickets for. It's not the music, because I think if you were to blindfold every one of the audiences from now on for the next 10 years, I think probably, this is a guess, I'm pulling it out of my butt here, probably 75% of classical pianists wouldn't have careers anymore.
There's an emphasis on showmanship. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, hugely. Because that's the only place they can go, because they don't know how to be original and profound at the same time. Yeah.
Kind of risking going on into a tangent here, but I agree with a lot of things that you said, and I've had this conversation with other musicians. We go to a classical concert, we hear technically flawless performances of great standard repertoire, and it's so boring.
Yeah.
And we asked ourselves, okay, I went to this concert, I went to see these fabulous musicians play great music, and it was so boring. And we're asking why? Why is it that we can go to why is it that we're creating musicians of an increasingly higher level of technical proficiency, but yet the concerts seem to get less and less exciting?
And
Is this your experience, or is it just me?
that's 100% my experience. And to prevent us from going on a tangent, I think we can segue this perfectly, and that is that the society that we live in now has valued technique over. They have said that musicianship serves technique rather than technique serves musicianship, and and that's why I think a lot of these concerts are so boring. Is because they're trying to achieve greatness and who can play the hardest stuff the best and the most clean and the fastest and all this cello stuff that really doesn't matter, when in reality, if you were to give them a 4-part chorale, how beautiful could they make it?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a very interesting question, because I've been studying the Chopin etudes for a while now, and but some months ago I received the invitation to perform at a library, to perform background music for the audiences using the library. And I
Yeah.
thought, well, that's a wonderful opportunity, but maybe I shouldn't be playing the Chopin etudes.
Yeah.
for that kind of occasion. So I went through, okay, what can I play? I can play some preludes from the Bach Tempo. I can play some Chopin nocturnes, easy listening, relaxing music. And then it really struck me as I started preparing for this little event and diving into this repertory just how difficult it is to make a simple piece of music sound good.
Hmm.
And in a way, I felt that to be, I had this contrast going from the Chopin etudes, which are very technically demanding, to nocturnes, some Bach preludes. I was doing this, for example, and just when you dive deep, when you start diving deeply into the music, making it sound good is. I didn't find it to be any easier than playing the Chopin etudes.
It's not. It's really not. Um, to reference the same thing, one of the most shocking things to me was I thought, at the start of the summer, I wanted to learn the entire set of Schubert Opus 94, the Moll Musical, and I thought, this is going to be rather simple. It's just, I don't know why it's still at this age I'm thinking those absurdly stupid thoughts. And even the opening, this horn call, oh, that's too quiet. But the something like that, and in the book section. Those things, I was like, wow. It's like there's the counterpoint, the symbolism. I mean, it goes on, and here I am a month and a half later still working on them.
Right.
Like, I mean, like note wise, like getting the balance and the voicing right on these things, and I'm just like, man, the older I get, the less I know. And it's just like, wow. But anyways, let's get into. I think a good plan for this could be maybe let's start kind of defining our techniques, defining what they talk about and their inspirations, and then let's start going into some examples of how they work.
Yes, good idea. So we already covered one thing, anatomy.
Yeah.
The anatomy is important. Uh, so we agree on that.
Yes.
Uh, um, so I don't know where to start because there's so much to say about it, right?
Um, I mean, so this is why I love this book so much. Her teaching method of the instruction manual, it
Mm.
kind of outlines how to define her technique, and we could actually use her suggested um conversational idea if you want. She says that her preferred way of introducing it is to define her method, and then to talk about technique as a whole body activity, to talk about the functional anatomy for the keyboardists, and then to go into the sequenced steps of how it works at the keyboard. Like she has these things called cue sheet 1, cue sheet 2, of how to properly sit the keyboard, and make sure everything is aligned, and then how to execute a basic stroke, which is one note without excess tension, and then to apply that to music. That's kind of her hierarchy of talking about it.
Okay. Let's assume that you and I agree on most of these introductory things like posture. Would
Yeah.
it be an idea to kind of skip a few steps and then kind of dive right into maybe the practical bits?
Yeah. Would you want to start with examples and kind of talking about where it differs, maybe?
We could.
Um,
So
I think Hannon offers a lot here.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's take a look at the first Hannon exercise.
Yes, let's do that. I've kind of been in the anti-Hanon crowd for a while because I
Yeah.
thought, it's like, sure, you can practice Hanon, but you might as well practice the Bach inventions, or you might as well practice any other scale-based music because it's a lot of the same motions, but we all usually prefer practicing music over practicing exercises. But in the past few weeks, I have been practicing humming
Mm-hmm.
for the first time since I was a high school student. So it's over
Ah.
10 years ago. So I've been studying number one, and I think that if we use Hanum intelligently and deliberately, it can offer great benefits. So that's my current point of view, and who knows, maybe you will change my point of view on Hanum. What's your experience with Hanum?
Well, she makes, generally speaking, there have been exceptions, but generally speaking, she makes all of her students go through the entire book, book one and
The
two,
entire book,
book one and two. Yes.
book one and two.
Um,
Wow.
and the reason is that it is an encyclopedia on how to use the basic stroke. So before we actually dive into it, here's what the basic stroke, and actually, rather than trying to summarize her words, let me just read to you how she says to start the basic stroke.
Yeah, that
I
would be
would
great. I've heard this term, the basic stroke, used a lot, but I would love to hear it explained and to see it
Yeah.
demonstrated.
So she has Q sheet one and Q sheet two. Q sheet one, and I'll scan all these and upload them. Is um, how to let me take a picture of them and send them in the chat real quick. So Q sheet one is how do we sit at the keyboard to prepare for the basic stroke, and Q sheet two is how to perform the basic stroke, and one goes right into the other. So it's very important that you have one before two. Check in masterclass text for the Q sheet one and two, and we can kind of follow along together there and talk about it. So there you go. I'll come back now, and I'll position my camera so you can see the keyboard, and most importantly, my hands. So Q sheet one is really simple. You just sit down. You haven't fixed your posture yet, and you just observe your breathing. So generally speaking, for most of this, the goal is to have your eyes closed, that you're focusing on your body sensations, and that you've memorized all this, in a few weeks from your first day of training. And so you observe your breathing, you balance your torso on your sitting bones, you allow your spine to lengthen up and down, you kind of take a breath in, raise your shoulders way too far, kind of stretch them out, and then just let them settle into their natural sitting place. Your shoulders are released, your neck is free of all unnecessary tensions. Your head is balanced, your upper arms are hanging, so a lot of times this might look like this. Your arms just hang freely, kind of just allow them to sling or whatever. You have to cinch your forearms, hands, and fingers. You start moving them around, flexing them a little bit, maybe bend your wrists. And your feet are supported by the floor. And that's what a lot of pianists actually I see struggle with still, even in their 30s and 40s, is to have a support from the floor rather than the floor be their enemy when they're trying to play and balance the different pedals. So having the feet flat on the floor, the legs falling naturally to where they sit, and then just maintaining this kinesthetic awareness and observing the breathing. That's the cue sheet number one. And I'm kind of speeding through this, but to go ahead and get into the basic stroke on cue sheet two here. The preparation for this is always a mirror. So in every practice room she has, there's always going to be a mirror right here beside the piano. It's very important to have a mirror beside you so that you can observe yourself and what you do. I'm never here. I don't live here, so this is, a temporary setup. But I have a mirror in my practice space at home, and so you assemble natural arches of your forearm, hand, and fingers in optimal alignment for the landing. The landing is referring to the landing of the keyboard. However, how do we assemble that? Well, she had this brilliant idea, which I had never heard of before, was that every person's natural alignment can be derived from their own knees. So let me show you what I mean by this. I'm going to turn the camera around. If you place your hand over your knee as such, and do not alter it at all, you just pick it up and let it be free. You place it on the keyboard as such. You get a naturally free hand position with an arch designed perfectly for your body type. And this allows you to be movable and free and still be able to be healthy, I guess, in that sense. And that really blew my mind, was that you could actually put your hands on your knee. And what's more crazy is that each person's looks entirely different, but it actually works for them. It's been a pretty foolproof way in my experience so far. So once we do that, we place hands and fingers over the notes, carrying it up from the knee, so we kind of come up here, and we're here. But I'll start with just one hand, and so we check in the mirror for the arch span bridge. Now the arch span bridge, what she means by that is that a lot of students will overexpand. A lot of students' natural hand positions will actually either be too short, like very compressed this way, or very large this way. So this is the overexpansion, and this is the underexpansion. Rather, generally speaking, you want to have in this method your hand on about 5 notes, a fifth apart, the interval of a fifth. So I generally use C to G, or either F to C, G to D, something in this area right here that's comfortable for my right hand, that's natural. And let me get my camera back up there. And so allowing the upper arm supported by the torso muscles to hang in the gravity. Now the key to this is actually quite important. Let me back up so you can see this really well. I'll put my hand farther up on the keyboard so you can see it. The test of this is to have a third party, a different person, push your elbow. And if your forearm is relaxed, and if you're supported by your torso muscles and your biceps, your elbow will hang freely and it will move like such. Let me move this.
Sorry, push the elbow in what direction?
Either direction. They'll take your elbow and they'll move it like this. And if it moves freely, that means that this is in fact released, the forearm, and that your torso and your upper body is supporting your wrist and hand at the keyboard. So that's the first test you always want to do, is really to test the elbow. And if it moves either side, left or right, then you're in good shape.
So we should, just to recap before you move on. So we have this posture of the hand that you explained, and then the upper arm should, if I got you correctly, the upper arms should sort of hang freely, so that if someone moves at the elbow, the upper arm should be moved. Is that right, or did I misunderstand?
Precisely, and just to touch on that topic, it's that way. It's maintained like that throughout all of your playing. So, for example, if I were to start the B flat sonata of Schubert on this poor Yamaha Clavinova keyboard, which does not do it even 1% justice, so forgive me on that. That this posture and this elbow, what we call here in the first stage elbow freeness, is maintained throughout the playing. So that it's able to do this, and the entire time, even if you're out here playing, your elbows are still free. So yeah. Component number 1, which you can follow along with again here, is easy, efficient lift of the forearm and wrists. This is very important. Using the brachialis and biceps, lift the forearm with the wrist released and fingers, and she forgot a word here that's very important, fingers hanging vertically over the keys. Let me type that in chat. Hanging is very important here. Fingers hanging vertically over the keys. She types later. My bad. I didn't read that. So yeah. So what we do here is we lift from the brachialis and bicep, and what we do in the beginning to help ourselves in practice is we'll tie a little piece of yarn around our wrist right here, and we'll take it and we'll pull ourselves up, and it should look like a puppet.
Right.
Being able to do this. And if you don't have a piece of yarn, you can wear a long sleeve shirt, which is why I have this coat on in the summer. And you can take this and get it around your wrist, about centered around your wrist, and then pull it from there. And right now, my hand is completely relaxed. There's no engagement in any of the muscles. My fingers are free. My wrist is free. It rocks back and forth, and it has complete freedom, and it's just relaxed entirely. So the first step is to be able to lift as such, but from the bicep. It lifts from here like that. And so for the first about week or two, we'll have students use what we call supported lifting. We'll use the arm, we'll use their long sleeves of their shirts or coats, and we'll show them. And what's really important is to memorize the sensation. And sensation is really a key, important word I think you'll agree with too. To have a memorization of the sensation, how it feels to have that lifting of the arm. And once the teacher has done it with the student enough times, we start having them do it themselves. So then they'll pick up their own shirt sleeve, they'll tie the yarn around their wrist and pick up their own wrist. And then eventually around week 3, because it takes a while to kind of get this new method of being able to play the piano engraved, even at the most basic levels, as you know well. Once they have that sensation like memorized, they'll start to work on it on their own. And what's so encouraging always is when they say, no, that doesn't feel the same as when I did it, like with myself, or it doesn't feel the same as when you did it. And they have this comparison of, okay, I know what it feels like, but I know I'm not doing it right, so let me practice that. And so they'll practice for an hour or two, just getting their hand off the keyboard as such, letting it dangle. And a lot of times too, a warning here, there's a lot of unseen tension that they can sneak by. And a way to check that is to actually feel their fingers. So a lot of hidden tension in the hands is directed towards the fingers. So if you go by them and you start pushing their fingers outwards, you can feel if it's tense or not. And if it's not, then you're in really great shape.
Right. So what I'm hearing you say is that there's not just an emphasis on what the movement looks like, but also an emphasis on what it feels like.
What it feels like is the primary thing, because all of our students look different. Because all humans are built differently. Me and you do not have the same body types, and we do not have the same hand position.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I recognize that also from the Timani method, where we have movement exercises to help develop coordination, similar to the ones that you demonstrated. And there's always this emphasis on sensing into the body and feeling the muscles that are engaged. You mentioned the biceps, the brachialis, feeling those muscles work and recognizing the sensation of the movement, not just the visual image of the movement.
Absolutely. It's all about sensation.
I have a question for you, and
Please.
this is, as a Timani teacher, I just want to get a little nitty gritty here. How much of this elbow flexion would you say is brachialis, and how much is biceps, ideally? Is it 50-50, or is it more one of the other?
I think it's pretty 50-50, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I think it's pretty 50-50. It may end up being 60-40 in favor of brachialis at some point, especially with some body types, because some people have much longer forearms or much shorter forearms. So the amount of muscle that they use to do a certain activity is different from one to the other. But
Right.
I think it's probably pretty much 50-50, because don't also take into account the how do I articulate this best? The entirety of the motion. That's what it takes to be able to do this, but also to do this.
Right. Both ascending and descending.
Precisely, because this is not the motion. This is half of the motion. The other part is descending. So it ends up being about 50-50.
Right. Part of the reason I'm asking is that some time ago, and I still do this, I exercise differentiating between those two muscles and having a higher degree of brachialis and focusing on having my biceps as relaxed as possible when flexing the elbow, when raising the forearm, and I found this to be very beneficial from my technique. And I think it's worth trying to attain a differentiation, working primarily, lifting the forearm primarily with the brachialis. So just to briefly explain the anatomy to those who are unfamiliar with these terms, the brachialis is a small. There are two muscles that cross the elbow joint that do this flexing of the elbow. There's the big one that you always see on bodybuilders. They like posing with their bicep muscle. I can't boast about having a big one, but you can see a little bundle here. And there's a smaller muscle beneath the biceps, the brachialis, which also does flexion of the elbow. One of the primary differences is that the brachialis only does flexion of the elbow. That is the only function, at least to my knowledge. Whereas the biceps muscle, it also does supination. So it will, if you tense the bicep muscle completely, if the arm is relaxed and I tense the biceps completely, the elbow will flex. My hand will go from a downward facing position to an upward facing position. This is called supination. And it will also flex my shoulder slightly, so a fully flexed biceps looks like this. And you can feel this for yourself if you tense the muscle. It will go up like this. So what do we see here? We have some flexion in the shoulder, the upper arm goes up a little, flexion in the elbow, and my palm is facing towards me. So what does that mean? It means that if the biceps is assisting in this flexion, the muscle is kind of not sophisticated enough to distinguish between all these, so it will tend to pull the forearm into supination, and it will also create tension in the shoulder. So that was one of my discoveries when I started differentiating between these two, is that I found less tension in my shoulder as a result of releasing the biceps, using the biceps less and more so the brachialis. I found that to be very useful in my technique at the level where I'm working at. I found that to be very useful.
That's not we definitely differentiate in terms of definitions and of knowing what the muscles are, but in terms of application, the differentiation between the brachialis and the biceps is actually something that's not talked about often. So that's quite an interesting question.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and here we might see, kind of perhaps some of the subtle differences between the Timani approach and the Lister-Sink approach, where we kind of have the same goal, but we perhaps emphasize different aspects. Timani is a lot about differentiation of muscles and differentiations of movement. Being able to distinguish between, let's say you do a type of movement, but what kind of muscles are we actually using? And you mentioned earlier that there can often be subtle tension. So I can demonstrate a movement to a student, and they can see the movement and they think, aha, it's like that, and then they imitate it, but they use different muscles to create that same movement. Because the biomechanics are so subtle. If you don't really know what you're doing, you can't really. It's very difficult to look at the demonstration and think, aha, I got it. No, probably not. And this is why I think teaching how to play an instrument at a high level is so difficult in the first place. Because your teacher, let's say you're studying in any conservatory and you have a teacher who is a marvelous musician, and then they go. But you can't necessarily understand how they do that just by watching them, right? So hence why we, in our method, we really emphasize that just studying the anatomy, learning the difference between these and these muscles, these and these movements, and then really trying to differentiate those movements in our practice. So that was a great example, if I may use that one.
Yeah, please. Thank you for sharing that. And anytime you want to share something like that, just butt in and do it. Feel free.
Cool. Cool.
And but yeah, getting back to the cue sheet, where we left.
Yeah, so that was, as you said, half the movement. How about going down? How do you the basic stroke?
Going down. I would say is actually, I think going up is much more brachialis and going down is much more bicep.
Okay, how does the bicep exist in going down? Because the bicep does flexion, right?
Yes. However, if you feel this, raise your arm up, like it's
Yeah.
here, raise it up, and feel it as it goes down.
Yeah, so it's
It's the
eccentric motion.
right, and it's the allowing of the bicep to release in a controlled manner.
Right.
That's what I'm speaking of. Is the releasing of the bicep, so that it's not just, but rather.
Are there, I feel like asking, and this is asking as a student. Are there cases where we would drop without controlling the descent?
With drop without control.
Yeah, dropping the arm without carefully controlling the descent. If you're playing, let's say, some fast octaves, just using that as an example.
But even I would argue that even that is somewhat controlled. Actually, quite controlled because first of all, you're keeping your hands in the octave position. That's the first thing, and so that automatically requires quite a lot of control, rather than playing parallel ninths. Oh, the volume's off. Parallel ninths of or tenths, parallel tenths.Versus. So that's automatically a lot of control. But let's say Tchaikovsky. Even there, it's not in any ways not controlled because our fingers are landing on the appropriate notes. We're forming our hand positions. Think about how much happens here. Our hand positions is forming according to where we land, and not only which notes we land on, but where we are in the keyboard. Are we down here? Are we in the middle? Are we in the high register? And we're also shifting the entire time. And on top of that, we're playing these notes. But wait, there's more because we have to voice them. We don't want the F to be the only note we hear, or the D. We don't want. Or sorry, how do you do that? You don't want it needs to be. So we're playing each note at a certain. We're dispersing our weight, and this is where it gets really really complicated here. We're dispersing our weight intentionally between the given notes to create a balance. And so that requires a certain wrist position. If we want more voicing in the thumb, we shift to the left more. Or the A flat, or the D flat, or the F.
I just love those voicing exercises that you do there. I think it's a great exercise for any pianist to take, even just a C to G, and just try to play that chord, and just try to pick out a single like melodies and voicing them individually.
And it never stops being hard. It never stops. It never stops being hard no matter what level you get to. And so, to answer your question, no, I don't think there's ever a time where we actually just go up and then just go, because that just has no control whatsoever. I mean, your hands are flopped. You just smash on the keyboard. And also another thing too, if you actually do that, look at your hand position. You have nowhere to go. You can't do anything because you have to fully reset in order to come down. So everything to a certain degree is controlled, and even at the highest, most refined levels, when it might look like we're doing, everything is still controlled. So, I mean, even breaking down Gaspard, a lot of pianists, it might look like it's uncontrolled, but actually it's so many basic strokes and different patterns going into it. mean, we have, and just the hand position alone is, and also dispersing it between. I mean, you're going. I mean, it's always controlled.
I have more questions, but I do believe I partially interrupted your explanation of the basic stroke because I still don't have it very clearly defined, the landing part. Could you just go through that?
Yeah, we'll get into it. So there's the free fall of the forearm, which is, first of all, in order to do the basic stroke, as you can see in component 2 of the sheet here, if you're following along, allowing the forearm, hand, and fingers to just fall into gravity, releasing the brachialis and the biceps. So the first step is having a student actually do this and having them in training, not in practice, do that, allowing it to just come up there and then release, allowing them to feel the sensation of what a free fall feels like. Because while there is some degree of free fall, it's always refined and controlled a little bit, when you're actually playing.
But you will teach a student as a preparatory exercise to drop the hand.
Before anything else, in terms of playing on the keyboard, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's very useful.
Yeah, and does Timani do the same thing?
I forgot if we do it in Timani. Yeah, in some exercises, as part of some other exercises or movement, we will do that as a preparation. Personally, when I teach piano students, I always teach the free fall of the hand.
Okay.
As a foundation for anything.
The free fall of the hand or the free fall of the entirety of the forearm?
The entire forearm.
Okay. I'm just making sure we're getting definitions clear here.
Yeah, it's perfect. Right. Just keep doing that.
Okay. And then, so component number 3, again, we're using a mirror always, is landing on the third fingertip. So we always start here with our third finger in optimal alignment, which I'll define in a second, on the keyboard. So here, we go back to the preparation thing, and we get our hand position from our wrist, and we come up. We're here on the keyboard, and we have our nice arch. We have our bridge here, our nice little natural bridge. We have our little arch here. We're all set, and then we raise our hands up. Fingers are free, no excess tension, our elbows are free, and so the next step is being able to perform the actual basic stroke, which is coming down free of excess tension and playing one note on the keyboard. And so, let's read from her sheet. We reassemble the natural arches of the forearm and hand and fingers, landing on the third finger. The non-playing fingers, this is very important, we allow the non-playing fingers to land simultaneously on the keys. We're not holding them back. We are not having any tension in the fingers. A lot of students will come up and they'll do this. And what you realize is when they pull their hand up, first of all, this is not free. And second of all, they're actually, if you notice here, they'll be holding up their other fingers because they're scared of hitting other notes.
Right.
It's not
so there's this tension of kind of trying to extend the other fingers because you don't want to land on those.
Precisely. And so what we do here to do that is rather all the weight is what we teach is that all the weight is directed into the third finger. All the natural body weight and through the arm of the shoulder is directed into this finger. And we can get into more advanced stuff regarding voicing and how that applies to voicing later. But to get to the demonstration of it, we bring our hands up as such, as we learned earlier. And another thing to look for is, and this is inexperienced teachers in this method fall for this a lot, we look for a spring in the wrist. Because when we perform the basic stroke, we have this kind of rebounds of the body catching itself and positioning itself. It's a natural thing, and it happens when you have this position and you land in that manner. And if you notice here, my fingers are entirely free. All of them are free. There's no tension in any of them. And the reason is that what we teach students to realize is that their fingers are not actually heavy enough to press keys on their own. So they have to be confident and allowing and knowing that if their body weight is in their third finger, the other keys won't play. They don't have to do anything about it, actually. You can do it all day long. I'm not not holding any of my fingers back at all. They just don't play because they're not heavy enough. A finger, like, I mean, it has the arm weight behind it, but if it just rests on there, the finger is not gonna, it's not heavy enough to play it. So, getting students to know that arm weight through one finger is the only thing that plays the key is very important. So, the basic stroke, getting back to it again, is we're free here. The bicep and the brachialis are holding the arm, and we have this natural rebounding of the wrist that catches the weight, and it's the shock wave. It's the shock wave. If you notice, it travels up my arm like a ripple in water. Maybe it goes whoosh, up my arm, and it's absorbed by my body. So the body here, in playing this method, is responsible for absorbing the shock of the piano. You absorb it and take it in, and then put it back out. It's about rechanneling energy back out into the.
So that energy, just to, if I'm following you, would you say that this energy goes, let's say there's an impact at the key, and then that travels to the shoulder, which is connected to the spine, which is grounded by the sit bones and by the feet, so it goes down through the body into the ground again, to the chair and to the floor. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and I would agree with that. And I think that especially, now this gets into organ playing, but in organ playing, we have a brilliant way to recycle it. Oh,
Sorry, I fell out for a moment. You were saying you agree, especially.
in organ playing.
Uh-huh.
In organ playing, we have a really great way of being able to use our feet to recycle that energy, so that when you're an organist, the energy is a bit different in the fact that the energy never actually ends up being grounded, that you're always
Because the
reusing it.
feet is moving.
Precisely. So it's quite a bit different in that respect. But in the piano,
Just to catch on that. So in organ playing, what would be the anchor? That would be the chair, wouldn't it? And
the
the
anchor
sit
is
bones.
the only anchor is the sitting bones.
Right.
So it becomes a whole different point of balance, and a lot of pianists, especially in the organ, constantly feel like they're going to fall or do fall because they have no place to put their feet, and you can't just rest them on the pedals because they'll play.
So I guess for all sitting musicians, just establishing the sit bones, and we've been talking about sit bones for a little bit, so I'd like to just give a brief explanation for those who don't know.
Yeah.
If you sit on a chair, it's roughly hard. If it has a lot of cushioning, this might not work. So if you're in a couch, this might not work. If you're on a piano bench, this should work. I actually have a picture of it. Let me see if I can post that. Let me see if I can find that. Actually, let me do that later. We have in our pelvis 2 bones at the bottom of our pelvis. And if I sit on my hands and rock back and forth, it's very easy to feel those bones protruding. Now, depending on our body type, that might be difficult to feel, or it might be easy to feel. I'm a very skinny guy, so feeling the bones for me is very easy, but for others, perhaps not so. So those are the bones that we're talking about, the sitting bones at the bottom of the pelvis, right? Right. So, oh yeah, here you have a picture of them. Excellent. And then you have 3 different postures. You call them, these are called sad dog, tense dog, happy dog. Could you just define these briefly? What does this mean?
Yeah, so I mean, if you click on it, it's pretty self-explanatory. But the sad dog is a posterior rotation of the pelvis, to where your bones are kind of scooted forwards. You're slouching, and your spine is bent forwards, and your neck, especially going into your skull, has a lot of excess tension. Our head is very heavy, and the more that our spine has to hold it by doing this, the exponentially more heavy it gets.
Yeah, and that tension goes into the neck, right? The muscles of the neck.
Precisely.
My head is leaning forward. Yeah.
Precisely, and that can cause a lot of problems. And I've known pianists that have specifically gotten injured just from that alone, and they can't play anymore.
Right.
So yeah, the tense dog is where it's what all students do at first. You see the teacher demonstrate, and you think, okay, I gotta sit up straight, and you go, and just like you lock in this position, and it's like, well, that's not exactly what I mean by that.
Matthew, could you demonstrate that once more, but take off your jacket so we can see what you're
Yes.
doing with your
Yes.
spine?
Here. Let me do this. Here you go. So instead of just sitting naturally, normal at the keyboard and whatnot, if you're here naturally, and then we go, and you push your spine forwards. That's what it involves, and it's a rotation of the pelvis, but this time, like as such. And what happens is the weight ends up landing in front of the sit bones, which creates a lot of lower back tension and problems down there. And so, what we want is we want an anterior rotation of the pelvis. However, we want there to be weight landing just barely in the front, but mostly on the sitting bones, allowing us to rock back and forth and find a natural spot. And our weight's always going to be a little bit in front. We're always going to be a little bit in front, especially as pianists. If you sit farther back, the weight on your sitting bones is always going to land a little bit in front. Because if it's not, then you're probably too far back from the keyboard. But that's just a guess. But you're always going to be a little bit in front of your sitting bones, and being able to have the freedom in the hip in the hip pelvis. What's it called? The pelvis bowl, the hip bowl. What's it
Yeah,
called?
the pelvic bowl, I
Pelvic
think.
bowl. Yes, thank you. Um, I was speaking French earlier, and my brain's all just lacking words right now. I'm trying to get my French back so I can go to France soon. But yes. So the pelvic bowl and having it be free is a really important thing, and being able to execute all this. So thank you for bringing that back up.
Yeah, I think it's great to talk about these things in posture, sit bones, the pelvis alignment, because it's so important for not just the entire posture, but also for the technique. I'd like
Right.
to add to what you said there with the connection between the head and the hips, or the head and the pelvis. Because if I let me see if I can take this perhaps even further back, so you can see
Please.
my entire posture. How's this? So if I slouch a little, if I put my weight behind my sit bones, I have a posterior tilt, so the pelvis goes this way. What we'll see very quickly in students is what happens to the neck as a result.
Mm-hmm.
The ear, where we have our balance organ, the ear will try to orient itself to the point of contact. But
Mm-hmm.
if the pelvis rotates or tilts posteriorly, the spine will follow. And then we have what I call the banana pose, where we, yeah, just one
Nice.
big arch, or sorry, one big curve rather in the entire posture. And then we have, as you said, we have a lot of tension in the neck because the muscles of the neck have to hold the head upright. And then, as you correctly explained, when we then tell the student to sit up straight, what they will typically hear is, oh, sit up straight. And then they go into the complete opposite pattern of tension, tensing up the muscles of the spine, pushing their chest forward. And maybe from a certain angle, this looks great, but then there's a lot of tension in the back as well. And it
Mm-hmm.
just creates even more problems.
Yeah. And also, when you do this, that automatically creates tension in the upper arms. If you notice that,
When we arch the spine, you mean?
and then try to push our arms forwards and do this, we have a
Right.
lot of excess tension in here.
Because of the shoulders?
Yeah, because of the shoulders.
Yeah, I can feel it.
Yeah. So
So,
it can end up creating a lot of injuries.
in your experience, when you teach this method and when you teach this posture to students, how long does it take for a student to really get the posture, to really nail it?
The posture, I would say, with them being responsible and having good practice, could take maybe 2 to 3 weeks if they're not practicing it as much, not as serious, maybe a month.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
a few lessons, like it's not just one
Yeah.
lesson, but a few
No,
lessons.
it takes dedication.
Yeah.
It's lessons, with them putting an effort in between.
Precisely, because
Yeah.
if you take a lesson and then they go home and they do as they always used to do,
Then nothing changes.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's my experience as well. And as also as not just as a teacher but also as a student, I had to learn this. I had to relearn it several times because
Yeah.
I would see Tina and then I would learn it and then I would go home and then maybe 2 more months would pass before I had my next session with her. So it's easy
Yeah.
to lose it and forget it. Okay, so that was posture. That was great. You know what?
Yeah.
I think we're gonna have to do a whole series.
We are. This is like going quite long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe just for the sake of retaining our sanity and our energy, we should aim to round off in maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but I think this is super interesting for me, and I
And
can
for me
only
too.
imagine for all the people it would be interesting to have a part two.
Yeah. In our last 10 minutes, would you be opposed to taking a look? Now that we've kind of demonstrated and defined the basic stroke, would you mind me showing you the how that applies to Hannon?
Oh yes, please do.
Okay. So we have the basic stroke, which is one note. Oops. So it applies to one note. The next step is getting one basic stroke, and this is what the foundation of the technique is, getting one basic stroke to cover two notes. And it's called the two-note stroke. And then three. And so on and so forth. Then you have four. I mean, depending on the piece, I've seen it go as far as 9 or 10.
Sorry, Matthew. Sorry, Matthew. When I disconnected, I think the picture and the audio got desynchronized. I'm just gonna disconnect and connect again real quick. Okay.
Okay. Is it better now?
It's better.
Okay. So we have the one note stroke, like I said, the two note, the three note, the four note, where it's all one stroke of the hand, and then what we normally stop at in the beginning stage is just the 5-note stroke.
If you break that down, Matthew, hold on a moment. The two notes. Is that, would you say, a down and up motion?
It's down and then down and up. Yep, down, up. And so what if you notice, it's just this motion that we practiced earlier. And it's being used like keys. Same motion of it's where we started with the yarn around the wrist, doing this, but it's being applied to keys now. And see, it's all about refining it and chiseling it a little bit more. It's like carving a great sculpture. You just chisel and chisel and chisel and chisel, and so eventually we arrive at Hannon, and we say, okay, well, what is the pattern that we have in Hannon? For anyone who needs to see the Hannon score, let me just take a picture of it for you, so it's in the chat for reference. What?
No, I'm just joking. We're already traumatized from looking at that one score.
Oh yeah. So if you notice, the pattern of the Hannon is in 4. We have 4, and then. So the way that this happens is this Hannon a lot of times. This exercise, every exercise is different. This exercise is broken down into a 4-note stroke. So once students are able to do the 4-note stroke slowly in other various exercises that she gives, what we end up doing is putting them in this exercise, and we do it quite slowly in groups of 4. And then we'll kind of reload it. And then so on. And I'm kind of exaggerating it so you can see it. And so so on and so forth. And so what ends up happening is you get what?
Just ask, would it be feasible to conceptualize? I'm just thinking. The way I've been practicing it is down on the thumb, up on the pinky. So if I'm doing one arm, I would
Down.
do one do as one gesture.
So an 8-note
Would
stroke
that be
then.
feasible? Yeah, an 8-note stroke.
Yeah. It's much more complicated, and in this method, it makes it about twice as complicated, but it's doable because what you're having to do then is what's called circumduction. And actually, we should, how dare us not define this earlier? We have multiple planes in our body. We have the vertical plane, we have the horizontal plane, and the sagittal plane. And circumduction is when you involve all three to essentially reposition your hand and relocate the wrist to play the next given thing in music.
So this circumduction term is what is often referred to as wrist rotation, which is not a very precise term, but it's
precisely
called this. Yes. Yeah.
It's that's called circumduction in our language. Yes.
Yeah, in anatomy we call it circumduction. But if one encounters the term wrist rotation, they could be referring to the same thing.
Precisely, and a keyword could be. Yeah, it could be.
Yeah, in terms of keyboard technique.
Right, in terms of keyboard, and yeah, I would never ever allow my student to do that at the beginning because that requires double the amount of expertise in this.
Yeah, I'm not talking about these
Yeah.
issues. I was talking about what I've been doing recently.
Yeah. If you're able to do that, I mean, more power to you, I guess. There's certainly a benefit to it, but that's at the much higher level, and I think we're talking about as we just agreed upon now, the more beginner level of this.
Yeah.
But and we also talk about landing points. You know, having the A as a landing point. So the C is a landing point. Land, land, land. And also, I have students practice this in like kind of like offset parallel sixth because it changes hand positions too. So it forces them to not just go. You know, you actually have to work at it. And so because of that,
hold up, Matthew. Would you then practice it as a basic stroke on each of these landing positions?
yes. But not only a basic stroke, because a basic stroke implies a basic stroke is just. So rather, a basic stroke with large-scale circumduction. Here, let me try to turn it a little bit more. Here. And whenever you play the note, notice that whenever I shift, you can hold the finger up because there has to be. We will like and talk about distracting. We'll hold your fingers as you play, the ones you're not using, because if you have to be able to fight off any kind of sensation or urge to tense up, and if you can hold your fingers up and play, and not have any tension, I mean you can. I can actually control my basic strokes by doing this. And so it's very important to be able to do it in every way that you possibly can. And to make sure that there's no excess tension anywhere. And so yes, large-scale basic strokes with circumduction are really helpful to get them to start doing the hand positions the right way. And once they can do that up and down, and normally that takes only a lesson, because at this stage, when they're doing hand, they have a good knowledge of all the strokes. And then once they can do that, then they apply it. And so on and so forth. And yeah, and even into the second exercise. I mean, yeah, it just carries right on through the whole book.
That's great, and thank you for that demonstration and explanation. Now I understand a little more about the foundations of this method. I have one final question. Would you, for this exercise, the Hanan number one, would you integrate into this gesture forearm rotation, supination and pronation?
Nothing that does not come naturally with circumduction.
Okay.
So what I demonstrated, I mean, you have to have, I mean, speaking physically, you have to have a minimal amount of that to be doing circumduction.
Right.
Or especially in the 8 version. But no more than that. No more than is necessary to just do that. Because
Okay.
anything outside of that, in my view of this, is adding excess.
Okay.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Suppose I'm just going out, like I like to play like a devil's argument here. Suppose that you really want to accent the outer points. Would it be more feasible then to use that rotation to add a little accent on the outer parts?
Accenting the 6, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well. No, we would use what was called a strike there, and a strike is a motion within a stroke. It's not a separate stroke. Within a stroke, that comes from the forearm of just doing kind of like a little bit, and we kind of bring some extra weight a little bit forcefully down from my arm to accent a note. So it would be. But those are still 8-note strokes. No more rotation is used than before. It's just that we're having a bit more arm. Essentially, what it comes down to is we're having more arm weight in that note.
More arm weight. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it. I think this is a exciting
Yeah.
conversation, and I would love to continue this at some other point.
Yeah. And before we go, could I ask you to demonstrate this and show me what you've been doing with Hanan?
What I've been doing with Hanan. Excellent question. I'll try to demonstrate.
Yes. I think it's valuable to everyone here to be able to see the Tamadi approach to this too, of course.
So what have I been doing? First of all, hands separate. So if I go... I don't know if, because I don't use the same terminology, but would you, I guess using the Lister Sync terminology, this would be approximating an 8th note stroke. Because I think down on the thumb, up towards the pinky, down towards the thumb.
We actually can't see your hands.
Sorry?
We can't see your hands, so I don't have
You
no
can't
idea what you're
see.
doing.
Okay, how about this?
Yeah, that appears to be an 8-note stroke to me.
Right. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking, yeah, circumduction or pronation, supination. So when I'm moving towards the thumb, I think of that as pronation as I'm rotating this way. As I'm playing towards the pinky, I conceptualize that as supination. So I can think of it as rocking back and forth between these 2 points. I found that to be useful in many cases, but it's more of a complete circumduction when in the case of the Hana. Another thing that I have been doing both hands is not the parallel practice that we often see, but rather the symmetric practice where I start with both thumbs on the middle C, and I found that to be beneficial for comparing my right hand to my left hand. Often, if we are right-handed, the right hand will be more developed and the left hand perhaps a little more clumsy. And I
Yeah.
found doing that kind of symmetric practice and allowing the hands to teach each other, allowing the left hand to compare to the right hand, and trying to imitate the stronger hand, whichever it is. It might be the reverse, that the left hand is more elegant. I found that to be beneficial.
Yeah.
So that's
That's
not
really interesting.
that's not explicitly like a Timani certified method. That's just how I've been practicing the Hanan recently.
Okay.
Yeah, I
And
can
I
talk
think,
more about the specifics of the Timani technique in the next episode.
please do, yeah. And what I think the next episode will be is like kind of like we did with this, you breaking it down and going through step by step of how we approach the piano.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be great. And then also, one subtle difference that I noticed, I think it's worth pointing out, is I noticed that you were actually doing more of the what you were calling the wrist rotation of having one here and then one here as you're playing, versus and the Lister sync method of keeping the hand always here and rather using the strike to just deliver more arm weight through the finger rather than just turning the wrist.
Right.
That's a
Yeah,
subtle difference.
and I suppose that could be circumstantial. I suppose
Um,
because
hmm,
I can imagine doing either way. I think of this is a bit my conceptualization of Timani is that we have a toolbox of
mm-hmm,
techniques and a toolbox of muscles and movements, techniques that we can
mm-hmm.
use, and the basic stroke could be another technique in that toolbox. So I'm not necessarily bound to one particular technique. And I often in my own practice I experiment with all different kinds of techniques.
Yeah, that's the way that she refers to it a lot, or has referred to it a lot in the past as well. Toolbox. I'd forgotten that terminology. I'm trying to think of a circumstance when I would explicitly use, because it's kind of taught that this, like, choosing to do this versus the strike is less effective because it uses more effort and more movement. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm not disagreeing with that, because I mean I've just something that I've not particularly encountered before much of. So I'm trying to think of a particular scenario and a piece that I played where I would use. Oh,
There are some cases of the Chopin etudes where we have to pivot on fingers to cover large intervals.
even there, I think. I mean, okay. First of all, I don't because I have huge hands, but but apart, I can play all one hand position. But apart from that, if I collapse my hand position,
Sorry, could you shift
the
your
pattern.
camera angle?
Yeah, yeah.
Could you
Sorry,
shift
sorry,
the
sorry.
camera a little?
The pattern. I still, my wrist actually remains completely unturned. See, I'm not actually doing this. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
bringing my wrist over this. Like I'm doing this, like
Right.
not this. Right. Which is still keeping the wrist level. Um, yeah, either there, I don't think we would actually consciously do this.
Okay.
Um, which is actually something that the Taubman method, as you know, is all about this.
The Taubman is very heavy on the forearm rotation, and
Yeah.
when I discovered that approach about a year ago, and I started implementing that in my practice of the Chopin etudes, that was a game
Mhm.
changer for me. I haven't
Huh.
been doing that. I haven't been doing the forearm rotation much at all, and when I started doing that, I just went from one level to another level in my technique.
Huh. I really have to consider that because that's the forearm rotation is something that I have never done.
Okay,
Yeah.
and maybe you
So
never had
that's
to.
yeah. Maybe I've not had to use that before because I've had this toolbox that has worked. Here's another question too that I think we can leave everyone with is that if you've had a toolbox that has worked in every way that you have needed it to since you were a kid, is it worth trying other things if it already works? I think the
Uh,
answer to that probably is yes, because maybe it could work better.
maybe it could work better, and I would agree with that for the very same reason. And I would add to that, if you want to teach, then definitely we should explore all the different schools and techniques, because even though a technique might not be appealing to us, it might be useful to a student, or we might encounter a method that doesn't work, that is still
I
being
agree.
taught elsewhere in the world, and it's good to have tried it and have our own experience with it, so that when we meet someone and they ask, "Hey, I've been recommended this method from India or whatever, some
Yeah.
other method. Does it work?" And we can explain, actually, I tried it and I found it to be lacking because of these and these reasons. So as,
Yeah.
as teachers, we should definitely put ourselves out there and explore everything that we
I
encounter.
agree. I agree fully. Well, do we wrap it up here and continue next time?
Yeah, I think it's a marvelous place to end. Thank you, Matthew, for participating in this. That was lovely.
Thank you, Bjorn, for participating in this as well. It's a real privilege to do this. I really it's a great um thing for us to do. And I think it's valuable to those who want to start exploring techniques seriously as well.
Yeah, and I personally found this very interesting to have
Same.
a little insight and a demonstration of this Lister Sync technique that I've heard so much about.
And I would love to um, be an absolutely just quiet observer next time, and just have you run through the entire process of the not Talman, the Timani.
Yeah,
So
sure.
please
I'd
do.
love to go into the nitty gritty details next time.
Well, please do. And maybe we can subtitle this first episode an introduction to the Lister Sync method. And the next one is an intro to the Tamani.
Sure.
Fantastic.
All
Well,
right.
thank you, Bjorn, and thank you, Mistro, for recording. And see you around.
All right. See you for the next one.
See ya. See ya.